بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, by the grace and blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we were able to successfully complete 2 chapters, and inshallah we will be commencing our 3rd chapter today, which is in regards to the hair of the blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. First, Imam Tirmidhi talked about the physical description of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then he talked about the second most important part of Nubuwwah, which is the seal of the prophethood, because he had a very strong message and very strong connection to the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now Imam Tirmidhi is starting from the highest part of of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's body, which is in regards to the blessed hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But before we can start, I wanted to just briefly highlight some of the discussion which will take place in this specific chapter. One is in regards to the trimming and the shaving of the hair. Obviously, we will not go into any fiqh discussions, any jurisprudence in regards to the trimming and the shaving of the hair, but we would only discuss those things that are relevant to the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as his sunnah. Number 2, the length of the hair. We touched this topic in the initial chapter, the opening chapter of Imam Tirmidhi's book, and we left those description in regards to the length of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so we can discuss it in this specific chapter. And thirdly, it's the making and the parting of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also was very keen in regards to the hair of the head and the beard, that every single time, every single day, it is kept up, and he's very keen as far as taking care of his hair. So, the combing of the hair, the oiling and the combing of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has its own chapter. So just the combing of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has its own chapter. And also, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to dye his hair. So Imam Tirmidhi actually compiled a chapter in regards to the dyeing of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So those 2 chapters, we will not take part in those discussions in these chapters, in this chapter, because they have their own relevant chapter, and inshallah we'll discuss those details there. So the 3 main items which would be discussed here is the trimming and the shaving of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hair. Number 2, it's the actual length of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And number 3 is the actual upkeep and the parting of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It has been established through the light of hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam only shaved his hair or trimmed it completely 4 times in his life. Only 4 times in his life. And that is to fulfill the rituals of Hajj or Umrah. Those were the only times when it established through the light of hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam completely trimmed or shaved his head. Other than that, the habit was to keep long hair. And Ibn Arabi, rahimahullah, he mentions in regards to the hair itself, وَالشَّعْرُ فِي الرَّأْسِ زِينَةٌ, that the hair on the head is considered a form of zina. Something that is beautiful, it is pleasing to the eye, and we know the billions of dollars that is spent in research annually in regards to how to make sure that we don't lose our hair. And we know some of the discussions that we read in the first chapter that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had this hair, this zulfa, this hair that would reach up to his earlobes or even below, even when he was in his 60s. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us an understanding to realize the beauty of the physical description of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Ibn Arabi rahimahullah mentions, وَالشَّعْرُ فِي الرَّأْسِ زِينَةٌ وَتَرْكُهُ sunnah. To leave it, to grow it out, is considered a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is practicing on something which was the practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we would be rewarded for there, as long as we do it with the right intention. And he mentions, وَحَلْقُهُ بِدْعَةٌ. To shave it. Halaq actually means to shave, not to trim, but rather to shave. To shave it is a bid'ah. Then obviously it could be questionable as to why did he call it bid'ah. And there's a few reasons why he mentioned it as a bid'ah. Is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually talked about a fitna which would raise in the time of Khulafa Rashidin, and these people will actually they will actually have a habit of shaving their head, which were known as Khawarij and some other groups. Obviously we will not get into those details, but that is the reason why a lot of the people of the past, they were firm on making sure that that they grew their hair, and at least they made an attempt to make a point not to shave their hair, just so that they don't resemble those individuals about whom Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam declared the prophecy that they would come against the Khulafa. So Ibn Arabi rahimahullah, he mentions that obviously the hair of the head is a form of zina, it's something beautiful, and to leave it is a sunnah, and obviously to shave it is a bid'ah, and we went over the reason why it's called bid'ah. First and foremost, in regards to growing the hair, obviously we know that it is a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam it was always his habit to grow his hair. But at the same time, there must be two things kept in mind. If these two things are not possible for us, then it is better not to act upon the sunnah, because it is better to keep your hair short if you cannot practice upon these two sunnahs and these two advices which come in the hadith. Obviously, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions, "Innamal a'malu binniyat." Obviously, the intention must be correct. Obviously, if you look at it, there's a lot of different reasons as to why people grow their hair. So the intention must be absolute in regards to growing your hair, that it is done with the intention of fulfilling the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So obviously, number one would be to correct the sunnah, to correct your intention. Number two, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions, on the authority of Abu Dawood, Imam Abu Dawood mentions this, that man kana lahu sha'ran falyukrimhu. Man kana lahu sha'ran falyukrimhu. That whosoever has hair, he should take care of it. The word that is used is ikram, and we know the word ikram is actually give it a lot of attention, to make sure that we are very, very keen in regards to the upkeep of our hair. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah, we'll go into the details of the hadith in the upcoming chapters also, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam always advised the Sahaba radwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in to make sure that the hair is always well kept. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, even during his travels, he used to carry certain items in which he would make sure a comb was one of them. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam can make sure that his hair is well groomed and well combed. To the extent that it comes in the hadith, I believe is in Bukhari, where Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha mentions that when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to be performing i'tikaf, and he used to be sitting in the masjid, whenever he needed to oil his hair, he would lower his head into the window and into the opening of my house. While he's in the masjid, I would oil and comb his hair. So this is just to emphasize that even while in i'tikaf, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made sure that he kept his hair was well kept. So these are the two things to keep in mind in regards to growing the hair. And inshallah, now we will move on to the ahadith, and inshallah we will discuss the ahadith as the words come. وبالإسناد المتصل منا عن الإمام الترمذي رحمه الله تعالى قال حدثنا علي بن حجر قال أخبرنا إسماعيل بن إبراهيم عن حميد عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه قال كان شعر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى نصف أذنيه. The first narration in this chapter that Imam Tirmidhi has brought is from the companion Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, in which Anas radiallahu anhu mentions that the hair of the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam reached the middle of his ear. The commentators, in regards to the length of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they mention 4 different lengths that come in the ahadith. 4 different lengths. But they emphasize the point just to reconcile between all the different narrations. It was never shorter than the middle of his earlobes. But actually it's at the bottom of his earlobes, which is towards the bottom of his ear. And it never exceeded past his shoulder. It was never below his ear, and it never exceeded past his shoulders. Imam Sheikh Zakaria rahmahullah ta'ala, he mentions that the reason why there's so much differences in the opinion of the narrations of the Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in, it's very easily understandable, is here is something that grows. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam let it grow, it went all the way down. And when he trimmed it, he trimmed it to a certain height. So whenever the companions would narrate a narration, it would be based on that time. And obviously, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would travel for months at a time. In different times when he would participate in different battles, he would travel to further places. It would be weeks and weeks he would be out of town. So in those times, the hair would actually grow. And different Sahaba mention different lengths of the hair. So the 4 different narrations that come in regards to the length of the hair. The first one is the one that is narrated by Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu an in this narration, ila nisfi udhnayhi, to the middle of his ear. Then we will see that there's other narrations that are coming to his earlobes, which mean the bottom of his ears. So obviously a very minute difference. But if we were to analyze this in a very practical way, we will know that when we say in the middle of the ear or the earlobes, it's very difficult to draw a line with the hair. Because obviously, at different times of the day and the different making of the hair, whether Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had an imama on, or whether it was just an average kufi, whether it was without anything, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did have his hair open at times. So different message could be taken in regards to that line, whether it's in the middle of the ear or at the bottom of the ear, to the earlobe, because it's a very small difference. So those were the 2 different narrations. Some say in the middle of the ear. They're very specific and very precise in regards to the length, that it is in the middle of the ear. And some say it was to the earlobes. And another one, some narrations indicate that it was between the earlobes and the shoulder. Anywhere between that. Obviously, they say it's lower than the earlobe, but it did not reach the shoulder length yet. So it's between these 2 marks. And then obviously the last one, which is shoulder length. And all the fuqaha, they are firm and they unanimously agree that if anyone exceeds the shoulder, it's prohibited. Because obviously, then we will fall under the category of tashabbuh bin nisa. Inshallah, when the time allows us, we will go into a little bit of detail in regards to what is tashabbuh, what is imitation. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions in a hadith, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Whoever imitates a group of people, he is amongst them. And some say he will be raised amongst them. Regardless of those situations, like al-mar'u ma'a man ahabba, a person would be with whom he loves. So similarly, very similar hadith, man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. The person who he loves and who he imitates, well, he is amongst that group of people. Now, what is actual imitation? It's obviously a very lengthy discussion. Inshallah, if time allows us, maybe in another session, we would go into the detail as to what is tashabbuh. But right now, we were just talking about any hair which exceeds the shoulder length. All the ulama and the fuqaha agree unanimously that it is tashabbuh bin nisa, it is imitating the ways of the woman, and therefore it is haram. Anything that goes below this mark, it would be considered prohibited. There are certain terminologies which are assigned to the different levels of hair in the Arabic language, and obviously it is adopted in our Sharia. So the next narration, which is narrated by Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, inshallah we'll go into the detail in this narration. وبه قال حدثنا هناد بن سري قال حدثنا عبد الرحمن بن أبي الزناد عن هاشم بن عروة عن أبيه عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كنت أغتسل أنا ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من إناء واحد وكان له شعر فوق الجمة ودون الوفرة. This hadith is narrated by Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, in which she mentions that the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and I would bathe from the same utensil. And then she mentioned in a statement which is relevant to this chapter, which is وَكَانَ لَهُ شَعْرٌ فَوْقَ الْجُمَّةِ دون الوفرة. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had hair which would be longer than jumma and shorter than wafra. Before we can go into the discussion about these terminologies which have been established in the Arabic language, I just wanted to briefly talk about Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. We know she is a companion that whenever her name comes, we just cannot move forward without praising her. Subhanallah, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she was so close to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that no woman has even come close to that status. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had involvement with a lot of sahabiyat, a lot of azwaj mutahharat, a lot of ummahat al-mu'mineen, but that intimate relationship, that closeness that Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she mentions, as I was studying through the different narrations that come in praise of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, I came through this narration that is narrated by Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. It's only 3 lines. It's not even completely 3 lines. It's about 2.5 lines. But she compiled her whole life into this statement, into this small narration. She mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam never ever married any woman who was a virgin except for me. That itself elevates her amongst the wives. And we know that Ummahat al-Mu'mineen are already our mothers, and we can never compare ourselves or any person to those. And Ummahat al-Mu'mineen already hold a higher status. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, out of all the wives that he had, never ever did he marry a wife who was not a widow or a divorced person. All of the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam were widows. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was the only individual who was married to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam without being prior married to someone else. And it's a very lengthy hadith as to how Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha would be his wife. Because when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was in Makkah al-Mukarramah, he had very hard times. And the only pillar of support, I shouldn't say the only pillar, but one of the main pillars of support that he has was Hadha Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. And when she passed away, remember Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam never married anyone while Hadha Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha was in his marriage. So when Hadha Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha passed away, and this took a big effect and emotionally disturbed Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, because he lost a very big pillar of support that was in his life. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would many times be depressed, and he would emotionally be disturbed because obviously losing a wife is one thing, and losing the person who supported you the most from day one till this day, it's another thing. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this stage was told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, all the different wives that were in the marriage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were all given glad tidings by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you would be married to this woman. This is established through a hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not marry any woman unless he was explicitly ordered and given the glad tidings by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to marry this individual. And she goes on to mention, وَلَا إِمْرَأَةٍ أَبَوَاهَا مُهَاجِرَانِ غَيْرِي. And no woman whose parents, both of their parents, the mother and the father, performed hijrah except for mine. That's also one of the things that she mentions. And she moves on to mention, وَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ بَرَاءَتِي مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. And when I was accused, obviously there's a lot of people who were accused in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Different, obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was living in the midst of average people, and everybody had, there's a lot of munafiqeen, there's a lot of kuffar, a lot of Yahud, and everybody that were surrounding, they're living their normal lifestyle. There's a lot of things happening. But when Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha was accused, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not just reveal any revelation, but it made that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that revelation part of Quran that is going to be recited till the Day of Judgment. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha mentions that when I was accused, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proved my innocence through the Quran, through the revelation. وَكَانَ يَنزِلُ عَلَيْهِ الْوَحِي وَهُوَ مَعِي. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentions this in his own words, which Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is narrating, that the wahi does not come to me when I am sharing the bed with any of my wives except for Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. And to the extent that sometimes when Jibreel alayhi salam used to come, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to tell Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, هذا جبرائيل يقرأ عليك السلام. That this is Jibreel alayhi salam, he is conveying salams to you. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha would actually have the privilege of replying to Jibreel alayhi salam when he would visit Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this was explicitly with Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, as we know from other narrations in which Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned himself that I don't share the blanket with any of my wives in which other Jibreel alayhi salam comes to me except for Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. And she mentions, وَكُنْتُ أَغْتَسِلُ أَنَا وَهُوَ مِنْ إِنَاءٍ وَاحِدٍ, which is actually the words of this hadith, that me and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam were so close in our relationship that we would use the same utensil for bathing. Inshallah, we'll get into that detail in a little bit. وَكَانَ يُصَلِّي وَأَنَا مُعْتَرِضٌ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha mentions that he used to pray while I'm laying in front of him. He used to pray in my house while I used to lay in front of him. And in other narrations, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that once I did not find Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and I started touching my hand, I started pressing my hand on the ground, and I touched the feet of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he was praying. And the other way around, she mentions that our houses used to be so small that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pray while I'm laying in front of him, just the way we pray in front of a janazah. Just the way the janazah is laid right in front of a person and we pray towards that person. Just similarly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would pray in front of me. And the house used to be so small that when he used to go into sajda, my feet, my legs would be there, and he used to tap my leg, and I used to contract my legs and pull my legs close to my body, and he would do sajda, and when he would get up, I used to stretch my feet again. So this was the closeness that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha had. And obviously, she is, again, going through her life. So she mentions in regards to the time in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in his deathbed. And obviously, we know that it was a lengthy period in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked all his wives for permission to stay at Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha's house. وَقُبِضَ بَيْنَ سَحْرِي وَبَحْرِي فِي بَيْتِي وَفِي لَيْلَتِي وَدُفِنَ فِي بَيْتِي. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam passed away when he was between my shoulder and my stomach. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was leaning on Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. And surprisingly, never ever she thought of this, but she mentioned herself, the last thing to enter the mouth of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. What was it? Exactly. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was breathing his last few breaths, he asked to do miswak. And inshallah, we're going to read about the virtues of miswak also. But when Rasulullah sallallahu on his deathbed, he's grasping for a breath. He's having trouble breathing, and he is constantly fainting. He's losing consciousness. But the last thing he asked was, I want to clean my teeth with miswak. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she knows that obviously when miswak is left there, the toothstick is left there for a lengthy period of time, it dries and it's very difficult to do it. So she wanted to wet it and then give it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when she did that, obviously her saliva was on that toothstick, and the last thing to enter the blessed mouth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the saliva of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. This is obviously a privilege that no other person has enjoyed. And then she goes on that he passed away in my lap, in my house, on my turn. It was also her turn that day, and he passed away. وَدُفِنَ فِي بَيْتِي, and he passed away, and he was buried. It is a rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A prophet is buried wherever he passes away. That's the rule. That wherever a prophet passes away, that's where he has to get buried. And this is the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was buried in the house of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So this is just, literally, if you look at this is just the cherry on top of the fadail of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. We haven't even discussed even a tiny bit of the life of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. If anyone is interested, I believe Mona Asim would have a lecture on this, and so will Sheikh Ibrahim. So you can download that and go into the in-depth life of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha so we can understand. A few things to discuss in this specific narration before we can go into the actual part of the narration which deals with the chapter which is in regards to the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha mentions, "Kuntu aghtasilu ana wa Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam min ina'in wahid." Me and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and I would bathe from the same utensil. Firstly, the commentators indicate that obviously bathing from the same container means that it doesn't necessarily mean that it was at the same time, but rather it could be taking turns, but it was one after another. So it wasn't at the same time, because using the same container does not indicate in any way that it was exactly at the same time. But even if it was at the same time, there's other narrations in which it comes that the Sahaba and the Sahabiyat would perform wudu with the same utensil by Masjid al-Nabawi. And obviously this does not mean that just because they used to perform wudu, it was in a fashion that it was done simultaneously, or it was done in a form that they can see one another. There was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made it very, very clear, "Inna Allah azza wa jal hayyun sittir," that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very bashful, he carries the highest form of haya, and he does not yuhibbul haya was satar, and he prefers haya, and he prefers that the body be covered. فَإِذَا اغْتَسَلَ أَحَدُكُمْ فَلْيَسْتَطِرْ, that whenever any one of you intend to perform ghusl, to take a bath, to shower, they should cover themselves. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam obviously covered himself at all times, to the extent that we can't even compare the haya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to anyone. You know, haya itself, it's a very unique word. You know, to the extent that many languages are not even capable of translating this word. To the extent that we use multiple meanings to try to define haya in English language. Haya just does not. There's two types of haya. One is the natural haya, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places inside of a human being. which is naturally, which is considered tabi'i, that is, in a natural sense, a person feels ashamed of what he does. So if something is done, a person growing up, even a child who is very young, if he says something disrespectful to his parents, if he takes something wrongfully, if he breaks something, he has this sense of guilt inside of him and he feels that he did something wrong. This is tabi'i. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planted this in every single human. And the decline of a person starts from this. Whenever you see a person, and when I say a person, it ultimately leads to a community, and a community leads to a city, and a city to a state, and a country, and nations get destroyed, get affected with this. Whenever you see the fall of a person, it starts with haya. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentions haya and iman go hand in hand. Never ever you will lose one without losing the other. Haya and iman are glued to one another. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he also mentions that the first thing to be lifted from this earth towards the day of, when it comes close to the day of judgment, would be haya. The reason is, haya is that one thing, this modesty, this thing that is inside of us, has been planted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that one thing that will stop a person from becoming an animal. And if you see any person acting upon the ways of the animals, and you see that he does not have any emotions, any feelings, and he does not distinguish between right and wrong, it is done because of this specific characteristic being taken away from his heart. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentions, "Innal haya'a wal iman qurina jami'an." That haya and iman, they've been linked together. فَإِذَا رُفِعَ أَحَدُهُمَا رُفِعَ الْآخَرِ. When one is lifted, the second would automatically be uplifted. That when haya is taken out, slowly, it will start taking the iman out of this person. Because if a person does not carry this characteristics, slowly iman will also be lifted from his heart. And we will, any time we see this, that a person who starts losing haya. And remember, while I was studying different narrations, I'm not sure of the exact authenticity to this narration, but Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala split the haya, the portions of haya, into 10 different parts, 10 different portions. And He gave 9 portions of those. This narration is in Darimi, and you can go back to that. This specific narration, this specific portion, out of the 10, 9 were given to women and 1 to a man. So, to get rid of this natural haya, a woman will have to work 9 times harder to get into this position where she does not carry any haya in comparison to a man. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planted this in our heart. This is, every single person is born with this. This specific portion of haya is born with. But from day one, certain people who are responsible for this upbringing of a child is constantly just making sure that this haya is taken out from the roots. And we see it. From this tender age, we'll see younger women, younger girls have constantly been advised to follow a certain trend that's been followed from the previous people. And obviously, we can go on, justifying whatever it may be, but this is the truth. That from a tender age, this has been planted. That these individuals, from their birth all the way till they reach their teens, till they grow into adults, and they start becoming sane, they do not hold any portion of haya. And that's why nothing feels important to them. And they don't feel like there is any specific reason to hold back because they don't even acknowledge that something like this exists. There are two things which you cannot draw a limit to. You can never draw a limit to two things. And we can define it in 100 different stages, and a person will have the 101st stage of that. Number one is haya, modesty. To the extent we see our own women, that if their hand is not covered properly, they would feel that it's something uncomfortable. Or if they're when they're walking, if their feet are showing a little bit, they automatically feel uncomfortable. And there's other people that don't feel that even after wearing something that only, ranges between, maybe 6 inches by 6 inches. And this is honest facts. This is nothing that we need to even think about. And the reason is because this thing has been stripped out of their heart. Naturally, this has been completely eliminated from their nature. And the second thing is respect. These are the two things. You can never assign any limits to it. Any time any person ever asks me about why do women cover, or why do they, cover their face? Some say you should keep your face open, so on and so forth. Again, we're not involving any fiqh discussions here, but if you look at it, the easiest answer that I always give, and it is simply understood. I said, our woman's haya ends here, your woman haya ends here, and our ends a little higher. That's all. It's just a difference of standard. Because there are different stages of haya. That a person, there would be elderly women who would say that the way these teenagers dress are not appropriate. But if you ask her definition, it will still be inappropriate for a Muslimah to adopt that definition. Because it's different levels. Because we have our own definition, someone else have their own definition. Similarly, when it comes to respect, no one can define respect to a specific manner, that this is respect and that's it. This is respect and it will end here. Because some people's respect will end in one degree, and there are different people their respect will end on a whole different level. There are ulama, if you look at the older books, the footnotes, they weren't technically footnotes because they were written all over the book. So some of the fuqaha, some of the ulama, when they used to read, they felt that it was disrespectful to turn the book, to read the footnote, that they would actually go around the table to study the footnotes. So if the footnote is actually written on the opposite side of the book, instead of turning the book to read the footnote, they would actually go around. And obviously, if you go into the details after the different standards of respect that have been established by our ulama and our scholars, we would be here all night. So we don't want to go into that discussion, but I just wanted to emphasize this point that haya and respect, adab and haya, this is something that will never ever have any limits. If you look at the previous century, and you look at this century, you will see a huge difference in the drop of these two elements in our life. And if you look at the century before that, you will see a difference. And if you look at the century before that, all the way to Khairul Qur'un, you will see a whole different lifestyle that were adopted by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions in those times. So obviously, even if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to bathe with Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha simultaneously at the same time, it was obviously while they were both covered, to the extent that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was in his teens and he was helping in transportation of the bricks of the Kaaba, and his lower garment opened, and he fainted because of this incident. And after that, never ever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam opened his lower garment that anybody could ever see. To the extent that some of the scholars, the dua, the supplication that is recited upon exiting the bathroom, it is ghufranak. And the literal meaning of ghufranak is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. So the commentators, they go into the details as to why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, even though it was something that is natural. It was assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's nothing we can do about it. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made an attempt to ask for forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he taught this to the Sahaba radwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in as well. That whenever you exit the bathroom, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. And one of the different explanations that is given is that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is asking forgiveness because he had to open his lower garment and he had to expose his satar while using the bathroom. And this is the reason why we should do it. Never ever a person, a believer, is allowed to expose his satar, even if somebody is, if there is a possibility of someone else citing him, then it would be completely haram. And if he's doing it without any reason, even if somebody cannot see him, even then in that form, it is makruh. So it is always emphasized that a person is covered in his satar is always covered. Once Imam Hanifa rahimahullah was walking, and this person came out of the bathroom and he didn't tie his lower garment properly. So Imam Hanifa shut his eyes and he started walking. So this person said, "Ya Abu Hanifa, since when did you become blind?" He said, "Ever since I saw your satar." So he said, "Maybe you shouldn't behave like this." So this is just to emphasize that, never ever a person should behave like this. And obviously, if you go into the details of the different emphasis that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrated in regards to covering up oneself, it's just beyond mention because of the abundance of narrations that are available. The latter part of the narration in which Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha describes the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is وَكَانَ لَهُ شَعْرٌ, and he had hair فَوْقَ الْجُمَّةِ دُونَ الْوَفْرَةِ. There are three terminology which is used in defining the length of the hair. Number one is wafra. That's also in this narration, is the hair that reaches the earlobes. The hair that reaches the earlobes. And limma, the hair that is lower than the earlobes, but does not reach the neck yet, the shoulder area. And then the last one, which is also mentioned in this narration, is jumma, which is the hair that reaches the neck area to the shoulder. So these are the three different descriptions in which a terminology has been set in regards to the length of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and these are the different lengths of hair which come in the ahadith as far as describing the length of the hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And to reconcile between all the different narrations, Sheikh Zakaria does justice when he mentions that obviously hair is something that continuously grows, and so whoever saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam immediately after he groomed his hair, he mentioned that it was up to his earlobes, which in this case would be wafra, and when he would grow, which would be majority of the times, because obviously after he grows a little bit, it would fall under the category of limma, which is between the earlobes and the shoulder length, and very small periods of time he would be in jumma, which is basically all the way till the shoulder length, because we know if it exceeds the shoulder length, it is prohibited. That is why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, every time it would reach his shoulder, he would trim it to his earlobes. And then he would wait all the way till it would reach his shoulders again, and he would trim it to his earlobes. And this is the reason. And some say that one of the methods to reconcile between all the different narrations is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would only trim the back of his hair. So if you were to look at the different lengths of hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ones that would start from his forelock, the top of his forehead, that would be up to his ear. And then the ones from the back would actually have different stages. And this is the reason why three different lengths are mentioned. That this hair, which is, if you were to divide the head into three portions, that the very front of the hair would be reaching the earlobes, the second portion would be to the middle, and the third portion would be to the neck. Obviously, this is one of the different description which is mentioned, and that's one of the methods that we can use, one of the different way to reconcile between all the different narrations. وبه قال حدثنا أحمد بن منيع قال حدثنا أبو قتن قال حدثنا شعبة عن أبي إسحاق عن البراء بن عازب رضي الله عنه قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مربوعا بعيد ما بين المنكبين وكان جمته تربض شحمة أذنيه. This narration is by Bara bin Azib radiyallahu anhu, in which he mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam's portion between his two shoulder blades was wide, and he had hair which would reach his earlobes. This one, shahma, is actually the soft part of the ear which we call earlobe. So this narration is talking about the earlobe. And in regards to the first portion of the hadith, we discussed it in detail in the first chapter. The next hadith, وبه قال حدثنا محمد بن بشار قال حدثنا وهب بن جرير بن حازم قال حدثني أبي عن قتادة قال كنت لأنس رضي الله عنه كيف كان شعر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Qatada radiyallahu anh mentions that I asked Anas radiyallahu anh in regards to the characteristics of the hair, the blessed hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. قال لم يكن بالجعت ولا بالسبت. First, Anas radiyallahu anh, this narration also came in the first chapter, in which Anas radiyallahu anh mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam's hair was neither very curly nor was it very straight. And obviously we went into the detail of this. كَانَ يَبْلُغُ شَعْرَهُ شَحْمَةَ أُذْنَيْهِ. And this is the same exact hadith which talks about the hair reaching شَحْمَةَ أُذْنَيْهِ, which is his earlobes. And these two narrations, obviously we know that they have been discussed in a lot of detail. As far as to the relevance of the chapter, it's only about up to the earlobe. So the two narrations that we have read so far, the two different descriptions, one was till the earlobes, and then one was to half of the ear. And then the narration of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, which is between the earlobes and the neck. Inshallah, we will continue. There's about 8 different hadith in this chapter, 8 different narrations that Imam Tirmidhi brings. Alhamdulillah, we have accomplished to cover 4. Inshallah, we'll try to cover the next 4 in our next session. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to absorb all the different lifestyles and the different terms and different sunnahs that we discuss here every week. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to adopt this in our life. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to practice upon everything that have been said. Ameen wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. مولاي صل وسلم دائما